This is what we're discussing this morning with Martha Karua, a lawyer and a potential candidate for Kenya's 2027 presidential election. She has been vocal about how the authoritarian rule continues to thrive in East African countries with multiple systemic flaws in democracy. This week, she was deported from Tanzania. She was there to attend the trial of Tanzania's opposition presidential candidate, Tundu Lissu. Martha Karua has built her credentials over time as human rights defender, and she joins us now to discuss the politics and socio-economic matters that shape the democracies in East Africa. Martha, thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
I'm well, and thank you for having me.
We appreciate you making time for us. We speak to you a day after you and the group you were traveling with were stopped on arrival at Dar es Salaam airport and put on a flight back to Kenya. Firstly, can you tell us where you are now? Yesterday you were in Uganda. And what state are you in after this whole ordeal?
I'm well, and I'm in Uganda, waiting to go to court this morning in the case of Dr. Kizza Besigye and Obed Lutale. They are charged with treason, and you will remember their case was in the court-martial, and after a ruling in January this year by the Supreme Court of Uganda, the case was then registered afresh in the civilian court. As we are talking, yesterday Uganda's parliament passed a constitutional amendment allowing the trial of civilians in the court-martial, in the military courts. So it looks like we are going round and round. My deportation from Tanzania, nasty as it was, has not changed my resolve and the resolve of very many others who are determined to push back the clawback on democracy and civil liberties in East Africa, and the manner in which our leaders appear to be ganging up together to oppress the citizens. We have realized we need to stand in solidarity with one another, internally in our countries, across the region, and I dare say across Africa.
Last year, Amnesty International's Dr. Tigere Chaguta raised concern over a decline in democracy in East Africa, which is something would seem that you guys share. He was citing multiple systemic flaws in the structure and practice of democracy. What about this particular case in Tanzania of opposition leader Tundu Lissu that made you want to offer your support and solidarity, as you say, in the first place?
Tundu Lissu is the main challenger to the incumbent president in Tanzania, Mama Samia Suluhu. All that Tundu Lissu has been incarcerated about is his call and his party's call for reforms before elections. And in a rally he addressed, he stated that no reforms, no elections. In other words, Chadema was not going to participate in elections if there were no reforms. That surely cannot amount to treason. A call to level the playing field. So his being taken to court, I see it as, on one hand, as the CCM and its candidate, President Samia Suluhu, trying to win the election by incarcerating the main opposition candidate, clamping down on the opposition. The last time we attended court, because 2 days ago would have been my second time, people were assaulted and prevented from accessing the court. That is, members of the public. And one person died as a result of the injuries. Many were injured, broken limbs, including officials of the Chadema party. And I do remember also the leader of ACT, Wazalendo Dorothy Semu. I saw pictures of her being pushed away very roughly by the police. The law in Tanzania, like in most of our countries, is that in a criminal case, an accused must be subjected to a fair and impartial trial that should be public. So as members of public, as citizens of East Africa, we were there to observe a public trial. We were deported, denied entry, not given any reasons whatsoever, which is in violation not only of Tanzanians' constitution and laws, but violation of the East African Treaty and international laws. And I believe SADC may also be having traditions like, or procedures like the East Africa Cooperation. Tanzania is a member of both SADC and the EAC, so it's a violation of many international norms, including the AU Charter on Human and People's Rights.
Well, on the side of Tanzania, reports in the media were that the reasons were they were having security concerns in terms of why you were barred from attending court proceedings. Yet we saw from some even footage on X, the social media platform of Lisu's court appearance, there was a heavy police presence. So that would indicate some type of a capacity for law enforcement and maybe even future planning or pre-planning, if we look at it in that sense. Can you understand this reasoning as that they had security concerns, given that there was so much law enforcement? And is it valid in your view?
That is pure intimidation. Recalling that the first time they never even allowed public to access the court premises. Remembering that they also had prevented Tundu Lissu from coming to court, forcing him to observe the proceedings virtually, which he completely refused. The court also refused the plea by his lawyers that he should appear physically. The change of heart to allow him to appear physically, I believe, was as a result of pressure, including the pressure of observers. I want you to know that even though they barred 6 of us from Kenya from entering Tanzania, several of our comrades had already entered, were able to appear in court, and in court, you can see from the footage, there were many diplomats, Western diplomats, as observers. And the question I pose to the CCM and its leadership, how is it different for an East African like myself to observe? How is it different from the observation by foreign diplomats? How come you appreciate foreign diplomats observing the trial, but you do not want citizens of the Jumuiya to which you subscribe to observe? We also do think that there was complicit, the government of Kenya was complicit in how we were treated. Yesterday, I heard the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs claiming that it was okay for Tanzania to do what they did to us. In other words, the government of Kenya is defending the actions of Tanzania, mistreating their citizens, than standing up. So obviously there is collaboration between these two governments in oppressing the citizens, their own citizens, and in preventing the rule of law to prevail in East Africa.
Let's talk Uganda's controversial People's Defence Forces Amendment Bill of 2025. This was passed yesterday. It will essentially see civilians tried in the courts martial. It's obviously been highly opposed. It's controversial, as we say. What will this mean for fair trial for those who are like opposition leader Kizza Besigye, who you also are wanting to support and see?
Well, it means aimed at defeating the Supreme Court judgment of the 31st of January this year, which declared, rightly so, that trial of civilians in the military court was unconstitutional. As of that time, the Constitution did not give UPDF any mandate over civilians. This amendment to give UPDF mandate over civilians not only undermines the civilian courts and the rule of law and justice, but it's also in direct contradiction with the court ruling and therefore is aimed at defeating the court ruling. which is again outlawed by the Ugandan constitution. What we are seeing is totally unusual. You cannot amend the constitution just merely to pursue your opponents. And Dr. Kizza Besigye in Uganda is one of the leading opposition candidates. There's also Bobby Wine or Changulani, Robert Changulani, whose party is the largest opposition party. And we have seen how his party is being persecuted and the members being abducted, tortured, released, threatened.
And just briefly on that point, because we're running out of time now, as you mentioned those different leaders, you've been vocal in the media about your activism for particularly this region of East Africa, as you call for the solidarity between the states in the region. Cases in point is what you make now, Uganda's Bobby Wine, Kenya's unreasonable detainings and arrests, Chad's Sukse Mazra, and of course Tanzania's Tundu Lissu. How do you see this and your calls for fairness and politics, your activism for East African solidarity affecting your own possible campaign for Kenya's 2027 presidential elections as a potential candidate under your People's Liberation Party?
I see this clampdown as a deliberate attempt by the leaders of the countries we have named within East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. As we draw towards the election cycle, in Tanzania, October this year, they will be electing, it will be presidential elections. In Uganda, it's January next year. In Kenya, it's August 2027. This clampdown is to disable the opposition from effectively participating. It is our duty, our civic duty as citizens of the respective countries and of East Africa to push back against this clawback on civil liberties.
All right.
And we are doing that in Kenya. We are doing that through the court, through calls, and also through unity of purpose as the opposition. I'm calling upon the opposition in the respective countries to come together in order not only to push back, but to have a fair chance of competing against this emerging authoritarian rule.
Martha, thank you so much again. We appreciate your time and for joining us here on Africa Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
Thank you and good day.
You too. Martha Karua, a lawyer and potential candidate for Kenya's 2027 presidential elections, talking to us about the state of democracy in East Africa, of course, zooming into Tanzania.
A fresh morning, a fresh